Congratulations, true crime addicts. We've survived another week. It is Friday, June 14th, 2024. And this week, who's the worst cop in the country? And why is it Michael Proctor? Young Thug's lawyer gets some street cred. And an Ohio murderer may get off with probation. All this and more. Stay tuned.
Yes, super excited. We are all pumped to have James Renner.
James Renner on.
That James Renner has zeroed in on.
James Renner once again drops a bombshell.
Investigative journalist, reporter James Renner, who's been on the podcast, longtime friend of mine.
And we're back with True Crime This Week with me, your host, James Renner. I'm here for you. Hey, if you like the show, this is the show that you tune into every week to get your latest true crime updates, to prove to the world that you're a true crime addict. You've got the stories before anybody else does. These are the stories that are going to be Netflix specials a year, 2 years from now, but you're going to know it first here. And if you like that kind of thing, if you know somebody that likes that kind of thing, tell them about it. Leave me a little review. You know, take 5 minutes, less than 5 minutes. I only ask for 1 minute. Go on to Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Give me some stars. Doesn't matter how many. Just go on there. It always helps. It's how podcasts get their wings. And as always, I want to thank my buddy Walter for manning the camera for the show. Walter's just back from his first round of Ozempic injections. He's going to look like a svelte Muppet, which is made of felt. Svelte felt. That tickles me in a way that it seems almost wrong. Hey, lots to talk about this week. Let's get to the top stories. Again, this week, no doubt about it, the top story in true crime this week is the ongoing trial of Karen Read for the death of John O'Keefe. And I'm calling it now. And I hope I'm not wrong. But I'm calling it. I'm going to say there's no way Karen Read gets convicted at this point. It's going to acquittal, a small chance of a mistrial or hung jury, but I think this is going to be an acquittal, and I think we're going to see it by the end of June, by the end of this month. Mark my words, unless I'm wrong, and then just pretend I didn't say that, but I'm pretty sure. Who's Karen Read, you might ask, to which I'd say, are you kidding me? Are you living under a rock? Karen Read is a 44-year-old woman from Massachusetts. She stands charged with the death of her boyfriend, John O'Keefe. The trial has been going on for a couple of weeks, and every witness testimony that we've seen has been broadcast on TV stations in Boston and streaming online. And if you're a true crime addict, you need to be following this case. It is insane. And some of the stuff coming out in trial, it's just very cringeworthy and worthy of your time. I haven't been this excited about a trial in a long time. Maybe since the OJ case. That's how old I am. But anyways, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is claiming that Karen dropped her boyfriend John O'Keefe off at the home of a Boston police officer named Brian Albert late the night of January 29, 2022, so a couple years ago. Karen and John had been out drinking with a woman named Jennifer McCabe and her husband, and they were having such a good time, they're like, hey, let's take this party to go. Let's go over to my buddy Brian Albert's house and continue drinking there. Now, Karen she wanted to call it a night, but she dropped her boyfriend off at the Albert's house, outside the Albert's house. She says she watched him walk in. We'll get there in a second. Anyway, John's lifeless body was found outside of the Albert's home the next day. The state says Karen intentionally backed her SUV into John when she dropped him off and left him unconscious in the snow. He eventually died from exposure and trauma. Karen's attorneys, the defense attorneys, meanwhile, believe that John entered the home and an altercation ensued, and the police and their friends covered it up. Things got heated this week when lead investigator Michael Proctor took the stand. The defense had Proctor read from text messages that he sent to family, friends, and coworkers, according to Boston.com. In these texts, Proctor called Karen a, quote, whack job, see you next Tuesday, end quote. He also called her retarded and made fun of her gastrointestinal issues, which is just low. Karen suffers from Crohn's. In one conversation, a friend of Proctor's wrote to him, quote, "I'm sure the owner of the house will receive some shit," end quote. To which Proctor replied, quote, "Nope, homeowner is a Boston cop too," end quote. Proctor also talked about Karen having a, quote, "leaky balloon knot," end quote, and that she leaks poo, referencing, again, her Crohn's disease. Proctor called his comments juvenile and regrettable in hindsight. Proctor also was also pressed by attorneys on his relationships with the Alberts themselves. Brian Albert, as I told you, he's the Boston cop who owned the home where John's body was found. Brian's brother Kevin is a cop too and worked a cold case recently with Proctor. And Kevin trusted Proctor so much that on one occasion, after they went out drinking after John's death, Kevin left his badge in Proctor's vehicle. Now, during the investigation of this case, Proctor continuously texted updates about it to his sister, who was friends with the Alberts, and he didn't see this as much of a conflict of interest. Proctor apparently never spent much time looking into any other suspects, including the homeowner, Brian Albert, his nephew Colin, who appeared in a social media post with bruises on his knuckles shortly after the night in question, nor did he really pay much attention to ATF agent Brian Higgins, who was also at the home and had been flirting with Karen over texts. He even kissed her at one time, or she kissed him, depending on whose story you believe. And he later destroyed his SIM card, dumped it in a dumpster, and then ditched his phone in another dumpster. Absolutely nothing suspicious there. Proctor's testimony alone should raise reasonable doubt and should earn an acquittal for Karen Reed, in my humble opinion. And I don't know what happened. I don't know if she really did hit him. I've never heard of this before. Have you ever heard of a case like this? Probably not. And if it's one in a million, probably didn't happen here either. But let's say she killed him. There is still plenty of reasonable doubt that was raised in this trial. It does not deserve a conviction in any way, I don't think. And the Massachusetts police have clearly completely fucked up this case. The only hope we really have here is that one of the 12 people inside that house the night of John's death might actually tell the truth one day. Anyway, the trial continues this week. A Georgia judge went crazy in the courtroom this week, and now he's in a world of trouble. Here's the background. The rapper, Young Thug, is currently on trial in Fulton County Superior Court on charges of racketeering related to his alleged involvement in gang activity. A rapper involved in a gang? Are you kidding me? This again? The judge in this case is a man named Ural Glanville. Young Thug's lawyer is a guy named Brian Steele, and he's a pretty good attorney. One of the state's lead witnesses is a guy named Kenneth Copeland, who was supposed to testify about Young Thug's involvement in criminal enterprises, criminal conspiracies on Friday. But Copeland changed his mind, even though he had an immunity deal. Whatever he said couldn't get him in trouble. Once he got on the stand, Copeland ended up pleading the fifth, which would have made the prosecution's case very difficult to prove. Because of this, Judge Glanville found Copeland in contempt and sent him to spend the weekend in jail. And when the trial resumed this week, Copeland was suddenly ready to testify. But this happened only after Copeland spoke to the judge, allegedly, spoke to the judge and prosecutor in a secret meeting that did not include the defense attorney. This kind of meeting is called ex parte communication, and it's kind of a big deal in the lawyer world, in the courts. It's a big no-no. You're not supposed to do that. It's never supposed to happen. Somehow, Steele learned about this meeting and brought it up in court, according to the Associated Press, and that's when Judge Glanville lost his cool. The judge wanted to know who told Steele about this unethical meeting, this alleged unethical meeting, to coerce Copeland to testify, but Steele wasn't about to rat out his source. So Judge Glanville found Steele in contempt and sentenced him to 10 weekends in Huskow. It also appears that Judge Glanville doesn't know the difference between civil contempt and criminal contempt, Civil contempt is what's used by judges to coerce a person into telling what they know, which is what this judge is clearly doing. He says that Steele can stay out of jail if he tells him who spilled the beans on this ex parte meeting, but he's calling it criminal contempt. And if it's criminal contempt, Steele has the right to a hearing and representation and being able to speak to witnesses and cross-examine them. But the judge is denying all of that. Long story short, this trial is about to implode. Watch for the Georgia Supreme Court to get involved this week, and I wouldn't be surprised if this ends up costing Judge Glanville his job. 20 students were missing from graduation ceremonies in Newtown, Connecticut this week when seniors accepted their diplomas. The survivors of the Sandy Hook Elementary School shootings are now adults on their way to college or the workforce in a world not so different than what they knew in 2012 when they were in the first grade. On December 14, 2012, 20-year-old Adam Lanza shot and killed 20 of their classmates along with 6 administrators using a Bushmaster XM15 rifle with 10 magazines that held 30 rounds each. Graduating senior Emma Ahrens was just 6 years old that day. She told CNN this week how a boy in her class, Jess Lewis, yelled for her to run when the shooter's gun jammed. She credits Lewis for saving her life. Unfortunately, Jess himself didn't make it out that day. For a moment after the Sandy Hook massacre, it seemed that the United States was finally ready to enact some meaningful gun laws. Some states were able to pass legislation for better background checks, but an assault weapons ban was quickly defeated in the U.S. Senate. As a direct result of our inaction after Sandy Hook, we've seen 12 more years of school shootings, including the massacre at Uvalde in 2022. Arming teachers and posting security guards have not stopped it. The only thing that will is reducing the number of firearms in the United States, but we're in no hurry to change anytime soon. Now, I've shared this statistics before, but it's worth repeating this week, I think. There are more guns than people in the United States of America. For every 100 people, there are 120.5 firearms here. The next highest concentration of firearms is in the Falkland Islands. I don't know where the fuck that is. They have 62 guns for every 100 people. Yemen is next on the list, by the way, with 52 guns per 100 people. You know how many guns England has? 4.6 for every 100 people. We are the most heavily armed nation on the planet, and there are more school shootings here than anywhere else. It's easy to see what needs to change, but here in America, we'd rather have more guns than more children. I'd love for that to change while we're doing the show one day. Those are the top stories. I'm going to be back with updates and some cold cases. I got to tell you about the Katelyn Markham case. We're going to get into it. Stay tuned. I will be back in 2 and 2.
Please hang up and try again.
And we're back with the Father Dowling Mysteries, starring Tom Bosley. John Carter, not the guy that went to Mars, the deadbeat from Ohio, admitted to the murder of Katelyn Markham this week after lying to police and family for 13 years, and he could get off with probation, according to WLWT.com. Katelyn was John's fiancée, and he was the last person to see her before she disappeared in 2011. Her body was found 36 miles away in a remote area of Cedar Grove, Indiana. Katelyn was a few days away from turning 22 when she was murdered. John was days away from going to trial for the murder, but he accepted a sweet plea deal from prosecutors this week and admitted to the killing. As part of the deal, John faces a maximum of only 3 years in prison at sentencing, but he could end up with only probation. The judge will determine that soon. One of the reasons things like this happen, and I think we're talking about Butler County, Ohio here, which is kind of a smaller place. It's in the in-betweens. These small jurisdictions and courts, they lack proper funding, and they could go to trial and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars. They could arrange a plea deal like they did here to avoid all that. Sometimes it's better to plea than spend money going to trial. But you have to ask, is this really any sort of justice for Katelyn? I don't think so. Former police officer Miles Bryant was found guilty of the killing and kidnapping of 16-year-old Susanna Morales in Gwinnett County Court this week, according to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Susanna went missing the night of July 26, 2022, while she was walking home from a friend's apartment. Her nude body was found in the woods February 6, 2023, and a gun registered to Bryant was discovered nearby. Bryant had reported the gun stolen, but asked the police not to assign a detective to the case. Once he became a suspect, detectives discovered several strange internet searches on his work computer, including a search for, quote, how long does it take for a body to decompose, end quote. Prosecutors credit the Life 360 app on Susanna's phone, which helped them track her movements that night. Bryant was sentenced to life in prison without parole. I'm sure he'll do well in prison. I hear inmates tend to be very respectful to cops on the inside. 57-year-old Michael Maiden was sentenced to 2 years in prison this week for committing one of the creepiest crimes I've ever heard of. According to OregonLive.com, Maiden hosted a sleepover for his 12-year-old daughter and her friends at his house in Lake Oswego. Sometime that night, Maiden made smoothies for the girls that he spiked with sleeping pills. One smart girl felt something about his, he was trying to push these smoothies on her. One girl was like, there's something about this feels weird. She didn't drink it, or at least didn't drink a lot of it. The other two, who did drink the smoothie, fell asleep and fell into a deep, deep sleep. Later, the girls saw Maiden sneak into their room and touch a girl's arm and check to see if they were still sleeping. So she texted her mother and told her to come get her. Once she explained to her mother what she'd seen, they returned for the other girls. Then everybody ended up at the hospital, and the girls tested positive for benzodiazepine. Maiden defended his action, saying he just wanted the girls to be rested for the next day. Ain't nobody believes that story, though. If that one girl hadn't spoken up, things might have ended up quite differently that night. Which is just a reminder, parents, please make sure you check up on the adults in the house where your kids are spending time. Know who they're spending their time with. A conservative Tennessee newspaper is in trouble this week for reporting on specifics of a manifesto left behind by Aiden Hale, the 28-year-old transgender man who killed 3 children and 3 adults in a mass shooting at the Covenant School in Nashville last year, according to Newsweek. In journals found in Hale's vehicle and bedroom, Hale outlined his plan to commit mass murder. In one passage, Hale wrote, quote, "So now in America, it makes one criminal to have a gun or be transgender or non-binary," end quote. And also, quote, "So now, because of you, I wish death on myself because of the pure hatred of my female gender," end quote. After the Tennessee Star reported on these passages, its editor-in-chief was ordered to appear before the court to determine if the paper had violated the orders of the court. He could face contempt of court and sanctions. I know both sides of the aisle want a piece of this one. You've got anti-LGBTQ Christian evangelicals on one side, liberals on the other, and it's just a complete mess politically. Personally, I do think the manifesto is worth publishing, if only as a record of history. Hale was clearly suffering, and his ready access to guns allowed for terrible and drastic action instead of seeking help for the mental problems that were clearly there. Hey, let's jump over to weird news. It's kind of a weird tone this week, right? But let's go over to weird news. I think we've all had our share of bad roommates, but a man out of Fort Myers this week wins worst roommate of all time. Last Sunday around 11:30 p.m., a woman called Fort Myers police to let them know that her husband, 33-year-old Willie Lumaine, was killing their roommate, according to CBS News. Officers arrived at the home and found a trail of blood leading inside the home. They found Lumaine at the back of the house holding his roommate's torso and a large knife. LeMaine then smashed a window and climbed out of the house, where 2 officers tried to bring him down with tasers. When that didn't work, they shot and killed him. Now this is what I'd call a justified shooting. If you're holding a human torso, you're going to get shot. And it was Florida too, so I'm kind of surprised they tried the tasers first. According to police, they then entered the home and found the remainder of the body spread throughout the house. The head was located near a trash can. Even if he was late with half his... I'm going to try that again. Let me back up. Let me try that joke one more time. Even if he was late with half of his electric bill, that's no way to treat a roommate. I lost my momentum there, but you get the point. Pop culture. Let's talk about pop culture. Are you watching How to Rob a Bank? It's this new docu-series. Really good. Here's the write-up. In this true crime documentary, a charismatic rebel in the 1990s Seattle pulls off an unprecedented string of bank robberies straight out of the movies. Now, this was back in the 1990s, and this guy, Scott Skurlock, robbed 19 banks. Usually they're not that successful. And he got away with millions of dollars before police finally caught up to him. He used everything he learned from movies to pull off the perfect heists. Skurlock was the son of a preacher, started cooking meth in college before turning to bank robbing after watching Point Break. There's no spoiler alert. This ends tragically. There's a sad ending to this, but it's worth the watch. Check it out. How to Rob a Bank, Netflix. And the book of the week this week. Let's talk about it. Did you know that you can copyright a book, but not its title? My book, The Serial Killer's Apprentice, was published in 2008. It's a collection of true crime stories that I wrote as a reporter at Cleveland Scene. Now, last month at CrimeCon, I sold a couple copies of that book, but I was surprised to discover that another author was selling their book, also called The Serial Killer's Apprentice. And it's very good, and I thought I'd share it this week. So this week, the book of the week is The Serial Killer's Apprentice, written by Katherine Ramsland and Tracy Almond. Here's the write-up. Elmer Wayne Henley Jr. was only 14 when he first became entangled with serial rapist and murderer Dean Corll in 1971. Fellow Houston, Texas teenager David Brooks had already been ensnared by the charming older man, bribed with cash to help lure boys to Corll's home. When Henley unwittingly entered the trap, Corll evidently sensed he'd be more use as a second accomplice than another victim. He baited Henley with the same deal he'd given Brooks, $200 for each boy they could bring him. Henley didn't understand the full extent of what he'd signed up for at first, but once he started, Corll convinced him that he had crossed the line of no return and had to not only procure boys, but help kill them and dispose of their bodies as well. The Serial Killer's Apprentice tells the story of Corll and his accomplices in its fullest form to date. It also explores the concept of murdar. I've never heard this, but murdar, which is the predator's instinct for exploitable kids. Oh, like radar, murdar. I get it. Current neuroscience about adolescent brain vulnerabilities, the role of compartmentalization, the dynamic of murder apprenticeship, and how tales like Henley's can aid with early intervention. Despite his youth and cooperation, Henley went to trial and received 6 life sentences. He's now 65 and has a sense of perspective about how adult predators can turn formerly good kids into criminals. Unexpectedly, he's willing to talk. This book is his warning in the story of unspeakable evil and sorrow that befell Houston in the early 1970s. The Serial Killer's Apprentice, check, and that's the one by Katherine Ramsland and Tracy Ullman. Check that out. That's the news for this week. I am off next week. I'm going on a little vacation to lovely Lake Erie, Ohio. Happy to be there, and I'm going to enjoy my time, and you should too. And in the words of the incomparable Murray Saul, the godfather of Cleveland radio, that means we gotta get down, damn it. True Crime This Week is a Fearful Symmetry production. Photo and artwork are licensed through Shutterstock. If you like the cut of my jib, I have another podcast you might enjoy called The Philosophy of Crime. in which I attempt to solve the big questions behind our true crime obsession by looking to philosophy for answers. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next week. Sit, Brownie, sit. Good dog.